sorry for that intro, guys. So before we begin, my name is Dan Vertango, and as you may have seen, my two other members is Mario and Martin. Okay, so now we must begin. So yes, like I said in the intro, today we're going to be talking about international trade or trading internationally. But before we dig into how to trade internationally, we must first learn what do you mean by trade. So trading involves the transfer of goods and services from one person to the other and vice versa. It often it often composed of money. It often involves with money and a system or network which allows trade is called a market. So now we must talk about trading internationally. So how do you trade internationally? But first, before a country wants to trade internationally, so if the Philippines wants to trade with China, the Philippines must check what their advantages are before they can trade that advantage with China. So, but first, the government must decide whether to promote trade with each other or not to promote trade with each other. If the government wants to restrict trades, then that is called protectionism. In protectionism, it is when foreign producers are restricted from freely selling their goods in the country. Worker, and you are just selling wallets in Green Hills, and then all of a sudden the government tells you to leave because they don't want you here anymore. In my opinion, this is both good and bad. Good, wherein the exports here in the country would increase. Increasing wherein there is such thing called subsidy. Subsidy, the meaning of subsidy is basically a benefit given to an individual, business, or institution, usually given by the government. It is usually in the form of cash, payment, or a tax reduction. The subsidy is typically given to remove some type of burden, and it is often considered to be the overall interest of the public, given to promote a social good or an economic policy. But the disadvantage of this is that the imports will be decreasing, wherein there will be three things that will happen. The first one is that there will be a thing called tariffs. Tariffs is basically taxes on imported goods. The second one is quotas, wherein quotas is the limit on amount of imported goods. And the third one is called red tapes. It is in short called paperworks, but it is also known as placing obstacles on others nations. The advantages of protectionism is one, domestic employment. Domestic employment wherein domestic servants or workers from other countries would come into another country to work, also known as OFW, which is what we call here in the Philippines. The second advantage is infant industries, wherein the smaller companies here in the country would would be able to would be able to keep on growing because there is no companies from from the outside to compete with them. And the third advantage is national security, wherein in US term it refers to the protection of a nation from attack or other danger by holding adequate armed forces and guarding state concerns or secrets. The second way to trade internationally is called free trade. In free trade, the government policies allow other nations to freely sell their goods in our country. So So countries such as US, China, Japan, Singapore, and Australia can freely sell their goods here in the Philippines. The aim of free trade is to promote trade with one nation with one nation with another nation. The other aim of free trade is to remove subsidies, red tape, quotas, and tariffs. The advantages of free trade is one, the country will use its resources efficiently. The second one is that there will be cheaper and more varied of goods, and the third one is that there will be higher employment. Higher employment because because since the country is open, so the country is allowing foreign workers from other countries to work in the country. Efficient use of resources, yes, because since the country opened its borders to the world, they they have to use their natural resources properly. The disadvantages of free trade is trade deficit and national debt. In trade deficit, it is when an economic measure of international trade in which a country's imports exceeds its exports. A trade deficit represents an outflow of domestic currency to foreign markets. It is also referred to as a negative balance of trade. The second one is called national debt. National debt, in US concept, it is a measure of how much the US government owes its creditors. Since the government almost always spends more than it takes in, the national debt continues to rise. As of January 3rd, 2019, the national debt of the US stands at $21.974 trillion, according to the US Treasury Department. It is easy to understand why beyond the politicians and economists are starting to pay close attention to the issues these days.